911 operators of Reddit. What call will you simply never forget? During a power outage, I got screamed at by a man who demanded to know why he didn't have power, when a car just drove by with its lights on. An 11-year-old girl hung herself. The sound of her father calling in, bawling so hard he could barely breathe, let alone speak, and the mother's screams on the background all haunt me. 8 years later, I can't imagine surviving that. Older lady, I want to say maybe early 70s, calls in with a sort of polite urgency in her voice. Tells me she thinks she's having a stroke. Tells me she has her grandchild at house with her. Asks me to call her daughter to come get the child. By the time she's done giving me the phone number, there's just a very slight slur in her speech. By the time EMS got there, probably no more than 5 minutes or so, I couldn't understand a thing she was saying. Fascinating, disturbing, and profoundly sad hearing someone stroke out on the phone as they're talking to you. Answer to the sounds of a couple of women absolutely screaming and wailing. I'm sure anyone that has done the job long enough knows the type of scream I mean. That blood-curdling scream of someone in genuine anguish. Knew something was up and got police and ambulance on the way, trying to get them on the phone to get details, and a boy of no more than 5-year-old comes on the phone and says, "My daddy is swinging from the roof and his eyes are open and staring. He had hung himself while his family were out doing their shopping." Not me, but an old roommate of mine told me this story. When she was an operator about 3 years ago, a boy about 5 or 6 years old called 911 and said, "Daddy's holding a gun to mommy's head." Through the phone, she could hear the father screaming at his wife and threatening to kill the kid. My roommate told the child to go hide and had to talk him through it, even when she heard gunshots. When the police and ambulances arrived, the mom had been fatally shot, but they were able to save the kid before the dad shot him. I took a call from a woman who told me her 15-year-old nephew had locked himself in the garage during a family gathering after making suicidal statements. I stayed on the line with her until my deputies could get on the scene. Before they got there, however, the family was able to gain entry to the garage, only to find him hanging by the neck from the garage door opener, while burning to death. Apparently he had dosed himself with gasoline or some sort of accelerant, lit himself on fire and then dropped with a rope. I'll never forget the screams of horror from the caller and the rest of the family in the background, when they saw him, as well as the cracks in my surgeon's voice as he yelled for more units over the radio, as the family started mobbing them when they arrived on scene. I've been a 911 dispatcher for 11 years in a medium-sized center. We have more than our share of crazy calls, but there are only a few calls that have stuck with me. For me, the ones that I can't get rid of aren't even close to being the craziest or most brutal. 7-8 years ago, I took a 911 call from a man who came home to find his adult sister had been raped and beaten. The suspect had wrapped a telephone cord around her neck and tried to push her through the window of the apartment. He was understandably very distraught. She was still alive and was able to talk to me. She had not been blindfolded, and I was certain I could get a description of the person who had done this to her. She answered all of my other questions, but absolutely refused to give me any info on the suspect. I later found out that the reason was self-preservation. The person who did it was the brother who called 911 for help. It was so believable it really messed me with my head. It also felt horrible that I had continued pressing her for info with the person who hurt her was right there, and that I could have potentially put her in more danger without realizing. I worked for a dispatch company very similar to Life Alert. An older lady in their 90s thought someone was intruding on her property and called the cops. She had severe dementia though, and forgot she had called the cops. So when they rang her door, she thought they were the intruders. so she hit the wrist button to get in contact with us. Then she got out her gun. I then called the police while also talking to her, and literally on the recording you could hear her taking shots at a police officers on scene. While they freaked out while I got my supervisor ASAP, tried to talk her down. The police and I eventually got her to calm down and stop firing, but apparently she had missed a police officer by just 6 inches. Family had to get involved and she ended up moving to a nursing home shortly after. Dementia sucks. I'm sure plenty of other people will have crazier ones, but the first time I took an overdose call. It's a crazy experience literally hearing someone dying on the other side of the phone. It was sort of a mix of gurgling, screaming, and gasping for air. Fortunately, the friend of the person that was ODing was the one who called, so I could actually get some information to pass along to my officers/firefighters. Unfortunately, the caller was also super high and freaked out, understandably, and decided to lie about what drugs his friend was on, which slightly delayed Narcan being administered. Not to the point that it mattered, but it did delay it. The person that OD'd lived. For me, the worst ones are always the calls you can relate to on a personal level. I took a call last month from a father who discovered his son with a bag over his head and a note next to his body. I've taken a ton of suicide calls, but this one was particularly difficult for me because the son was my age, and the way the father pleaded with his son was almost exactly the same way I've imagined my dad if I were to ever do the same. I've had the same "come on buddy, don't do this to me" running in my head at least 2-3 times a day since. Also, not technically a call, but my first shift on my own, I dispatched the deputy I did my ride along with to a domestic that he ended up being shot and killed at. Hearing his blood gurgle, shots fired, scream on the radio won't be something I'll ever forget. I have been doing this more than a decade and have taken some absolutely nutty calls. The one that stands out is not, but it stays with me. I took a 911 from a woman who asked me for an ambulance. Dead voice, no emotion. She could have been calling the bank for their hours. I got and confirmed her address, again, very calm. Then I asked her what was going on. In that same lifeless voice she said, "My son is dead." There was no change in her tone whatsoever. I asked her if she was sure. Asked her to start CPR, which she flatly refused. I asked her, "Please, let's at least try CPR," and she said, "He is cold and dead and it's my fault, my fault, my fault." Her tone never changed. Turns out she had caught her 15-year-old son doing oxys. He puked at some point. She was totally clueless and just sent his ass to bed. Sometime during the night he either took more or what he had taken caused him to vomit again, and he choked to death. I will never forget that tone she had, because in a way she was right, her ignorance did contribute to his death, but she's not even partly to blame. Try telling her that though, that woman will never stop hating herself. I feel for her to this day, and that was 2009-ish. Used to take ambulance calls for 999 over here in the UK and thought I'd had a more happier call here to buck the trend. I managed to deliver 5 babies while doing that job. The first one the dad was on. First thing he screams is, "The ad's coming out, the ad's coming out." Another one they were on their way to hospital when the baby just started arriving, so I delivered the baby over the phone on the side of a motorway. The sound of a baby crying during childbirth is the most stress-relieving sound of all. One of the families wrote in to say thank you and I got to meet them and the baby. On the flip side, hangings were never fun. Thankfully, I only ever had 2. The first was a Tuesday morning. Just started my shift at 7 a.m. First call. Woman comes on screaming this blood-curdling noise. Just pure emotion. Nothing like in the films. Turns out her husband had hung himself in the bedroom, with the kids still in the house. So she was trying to keep the kids out while get an ambulance. The other one was a man who called ever so calmly to say his daughter had hung herself. I didn't understand why he was so calm and measured. Then he said at the end he was a police officer, so I'd seen this before. Poor guy, I still think about those two callers.